welcome back to Mr. Obsolete's Vintage Homesteading. Well, today we're going to be talking about Brand X chainsaws again and why I like them. These are what I call just because saws. I collect them just because I like them. I actually take them out and use them occasionally, but they do have their drawbacks. This one is very heavy. But this is one of the best Brand X chainsaws made, in my opinion. These were sold by Sears and David Bradley Corporation that built them. I think was part of the Sears empire at one time. And later on they sold out to a company called Roper. Roper made the lawn tractors and chainsaws for them a long time after they'd phased the David Bradley name out. And these designs were also phased out. But this is a Model 360. This is the first saw they made that you could run upside down or sideways. Had a pumper carb on it. It's a gear drive right here. And since they use a gear, they run the engine backwards to run one way and then the gear and then the chain. So it's kind of an interesting deal. These have a 1/2-inch pitch chain and they're 4 horsepower at 4,500 RPM. And this one weighs right about 29 pounds, so it's pretty heavy. It's got fuel, bar oil, manual oiler, your kill switch, and of course your recoil. And you can see that it pulls this way so the engine runs backwards. And this was their premium saw. Sears had good, better, and best, and this would be the best model. And the reasons for that is that the engine, the Power Products engine, could be made down to a price. This one has needle bearings on the connecting rod and ball bearings for the main bearings and stuff. If it were the bottom of the line engine, it would have a bushing connecting rod, and they're really short-lived. One thing too, the filling spikes here are really thin. They're just stamped metal, but totally effective. It has 2 of them. And you can see there's a place here for a bracket for the bar. You can remove this and put a sprocket on here, and you can put a bar on it, and you can actually cut on the outside or the inside. Like this one, you can see this, the bar is on the outside here. That looks like we're getting rained on, so we'll be back. Okay, well, like I say, this would be called Sears' best chainsaw because it has the good motor, has the nice deluxe exhaust, gear drive, and all-position carburetor. But it's amazing how companies will cheapen stuff up just for a few bucks to make a different model. But here's a good example. This saw is mechanically just about the same displacement. And this is what would be called their better or mid-range saw. It has a stamped steel tank instead of a cast aluminum like this, just to cut the cost a bit. His gear drive has a cheapo exhaust system on it. And you can't change the bar from one side of the gearbox to the other like on this one. And it has since this is a later saw, it has a Power Products starter, which is a copy of the Fairbanks. It's not very good. And then the carburetor is a Tecumseh Power Products pumper carburetor. They're just not very good. Either run really good at high speed or low speed, but 3/4 or half throttle and stuff, they just don't work that good. They're always hunting. So anyway, we'll be back with some more. Okay, well, here's another Brand X saw that I like. It's called a Mono. They were one of the larger selling Brand X saws. They all use the Power Products engines like most all of them did. Some of them use West Bend, but not in this brand of saw, just other saw companies. And this was made in 1966. Get the same AH-47 engine, 77 cc, just like the Sears saws did. It's been raining on us here a bit, so I'm trying to get this video done in between rainstorms. But this has the cheapo Tecumseh flat bottom pumper carb on it, which isn't really very good. and then it just has a foam air filter out here in the open, which works okay. But it does have a die-cast aluminum cover shroud, cooling shroud. Switch is right there. This is oil and gas, and you've got your throttle lock and manual oiler here. Pretty much laid out. It's got a nice cast muffler on it. It's got a little slot in here you can put a screen in for a spark arrestor. Most of the Brand X saws didn't have that. They just ran a straight exhaust. But like I say, this is a 1966 model, and it was obsolete when it was being sold new. This is also a mono, 1966 also. This has a totally modern layout. The only thing that's not modern on it, doesn't have a cover over the clutch. But you know, typical layout, just in choke and manual oiler. It has automatic and throttle lock and switch on the side, top mount for the fuel and oil. And this you know, has a odd carburetor. It was made by Brown Company, which is a copy of the Tillotson HL series. And kits for these are virtually non-existent. Some guy makes them once in a while, but I've been waiting for a long time. But anyway, this has a die-cast muffler, and it has a plate in there with a baffle to shoot exhaust out. Got a nice small chain on it. It's a nice little saw. Been used quite a bit. Teeth are cut back quite a ways. But that's why I like collecting these type of saws. Not because I use them a lot, although I do. I just, you know, everyone's different. They get a little different history. It's all the different features, good and bad. Just makes collecting interesting. So I'll be back with a couple more. Well, here's another Brand X saw that's kind of interesting. This is a Bushnell Swifty, which I had in a prior video. This was a top of line saw. Uses the AH-47 engine, again, Power Products engine. But the features on this that make it better than the low-end models is it's got this really nicely made die-cast fuel tank here. And you can see the decal here. And the muffler's got a deluxe muffler. And it actually has a screen in it for a spark arrestor. Has a clutch cover, which a lot of saws this era did not have. Now this chain was kind of froze up on this thing, and I've been oiling it with Marvel Mystery Oil. And you can see it moves pretty good. Still needs a little work, but couldn't move when I first brought it out from the barn there. But a lot of companies will cheapen stuff up just to have a poor man's version of the same saw. And here it is. This one's a Bushnell Swifty. And the difference is it's the same engine. Probably has a cheaper connecting rod in it. Has a stamped steel fuel tank. Handle and stuff is the same, clutch cover and all that. Has a cheapo bluey exhaust on it. And manual oiling only. And it's got the Fairbanks Morse starter, my favorite. But anyway, this the chain on this one is pretty well used up, but so it's been used quite a bit. So anyway, that's how companies in the Brand X market would make things, so that if you go in and you want to save a few bucks, you can buy a cheaper version that's basically the same saw with just a few cheaper features. But anyway, that's what makes collecting old stuff interesting. You know, you have to think into the guys, the marketing guys, how they would come up with these different things. And you know, like one thing that they would do on a lot of the lawnmowers and whatnot, they'd have the same basic model, and they had it with 3 different horsepower ratings. And the only difference was a setting on the carburetor, but you had to pay $15 or $20 more to get the next horsepower. All I had to do is adjust a screw on it and you had the maximum horsepower. But anyway, just funny stuff over the years. But anyway, okay, well, the question I get a lot is, where do you come up with all this old stuff? Well, the thing is, I started collecting when this stuff was just junk. Nobody wanted it. And over time I accumulated stuff, and never a lot at any one time, just a little bit here and there, and adds up over time. But a lot of the stuff when I got in the early years of collecting was just stuff that people wanted to get rid of because they had no use for it. Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about lawnmowers, so we'll be back.
Crap.
Well, we're back to talk about how I acquire stuff. Well, it didn't happen overnight. I started collecting stuff years and years ago when nobody cared about it. It was just junk. But I always was fascinated with it. This Flymo is a perfect example of how stuff happens. And I used to work on people's equipment all the time for a living, but I'd never seen a Flymo. And then one time on a Saturday after work, I was on my way home, and there's a big industrial complex that was built on this huge rock outcropping. And on the front of it there was a road, and on the far side there was a parking lot, and the other end it was just a sheer drop off of a cliff. But on the other side they had this really beautifully manicured hill, and it was really steep. And the groundskeeper kept that thing like new. And I thought, well, how the heck do they mow that? Well, up at the top there was a walkway, and the guy was up there and he had a Flymo with a rope on the handle. He just let it slide down the hill, pull it back up, move it over and stuff. And I thought, well, I need one of those. I don't know why, but I just need one anyway. So I started looking for one, and for a long time I didn't have any luck. There just wasn't any of them around. But one day these wily character friends of mine, Len and Shirley, showed up, and they said, hey, we found this treasure trove of junk. It's out in the middle of nowhere, but it's right on an old highway, and the guy has a big swap meet and all kinds of junk there and stuff. So we went out there, and it was an old dairy creamery way back and stuff, and had railroad tracks through there at one point in time. It was a big deal. It was in a logging area. The guy that owned this sold chainsaws and power equipment for a long time, but his vision started going bad, and logging was starting to whiz out too. So, but anyway, we just walked in and introduced ourselves and wandered around there, and I asked him, I said, do you ever see a Flymo? He said, oh yeah, there's one right over there on the wall. He said, a guy brought it in here 3 years ago to get fixed and never picked it up, so you can have it for the price of the repair. So I got it for like 25 bucks. I've had it for, I don't know, 25, 30 years, I don't know, long time. But that's the thing with collecting. You know, I never really collected a lot at any time. It's just a little bit here and there, and so I'm an accumulator instead of a guy that just goes in and buys up everything and builds a giant collection overnight. It just didn't happen in my case. But anyway, this guy had a memory, like he knew where everything was in his place, and so if I was looking for something, I'd go in there and, hey, yeah, it's right over here, it's right over there. I ended up with a lot of really neat stuff out of there. I'll do some more stories on it, and I'll show you some of the other stuff at another time. But anyway, on the Flymo here, the last video I did, it didn't show a real good view at the bottom here. So anyway, right here are the air ducts where the air comes in. And then on the bottom there's this fan, and of course here's the blade. So as this spins, it draws the air in, it pushes down in this periphery lip here, regulates the air blowing out, and of course throttle speed controls the height. And so at full throttle, where it works best, it runs about 1.5 inches off the ground. Now these were really intended for really nicely manicured lawns, and like I say, they were not a success in the US, but in the UK, or Great Britain as they call it, I call it not so Great Britain, but they're the biggest seller and still are to this day. And most of the people there have little bitty yards and perfectly manicured, so the thing that they can do with this, I can go right in and swing along the shrubs or whatever like that, instead of having to turn the mower and stuff. But another feature on this thing is on the handle here. You flip this up and it lays flat, and if your fuel cap is tight here, you can hang it on the side of a wall. And it's kind of an interesting little feature. And, you know, your recoil's right here and your throttle. There isn't much to them, but anyway, I'll show you another lawnmower here in just a minute. See, the handle flips right up. So step here when starting. Be back. Well, here's probably the worst lawnmower I have ever seen. It's a Triax from Great Britain, or as I call it, not so Great Britain, and I'll explain that here briefly. It has a alloy deck. It has 3 wheels. The pivoting one in the back here I'll show in a minute. But the reason that I say this is the worst mower I've ever used or seen is the way that you have to operate it, and then the other is the engine. Now this engine is a 2-cycle engine, and it's made by a company that's called JAP. And what that stands for is James A. Prestwich. That was a company that made motorcycle engines, and they were some of the finest engines ever made. In Britain, the motorcycle industry was huge. One time it controlled the world's market share, and there was lots of small manufacturers that didn't have their own engines, and so Villiers and JAP and Excelsior and a bunch of others made engines for these different manufacturers. And the engine in this, if you've ever seen a movie Lawrence of Arabia, and the bike he had was a Bruff Superior, which is probably one of the finest motorcycles ever made. It had a JAP engine in it. Now this thing here is the worst engine, 2-cycle engine I've ever seen. The way it's made, it's really terrible. The castings are really crude and awful. It's clunky, has a really poor quality ignition system. Muffler points up, so all the smoke will come right up in your face, and if you leave it out in the rain and get full of rain. And the only thing that's interesting that's good on it's the adjustment for the front wheels here. You can pull this knob out and move it back and forth, but it only does the front wheels, it doesn't do the back one, so it won't be level, it'll be cutting at an angle, which is really stupid. So anyway, I'll get this down and show you why I think it's such a horrible piece. Okay, well, the only convenient thing on it is the throttle control, which is right here, which is good. But anyway, the thing that is really dumb about this design is that if you're coming along the edge of a building and you need to turn, like if you had a regular lawnmower, you would just come a little bit past it and then pick it up and turn it and go off. Well, on this one, you come up to the corner and you have to walk all the way over here, and then you have to walk all the way back every time you move and stuff. And like I say, it's really bad, and if you try to pick it up, it's tippy. It's terrible, but interesting. That's why I collect a lot of this stuff. I like, you know, to know the history and all the designs, good or bad, it's still part of history. So anyway, so we'll come back some other time with some of our best lawnmowers. We already showed you a bunch of them in other videos, but like I say, this is absolutely the worst. So anyway, we'll see you in the next video. Vintage history is interesting.